Memories or what? Everyone, well, at least we older folks, remembers that scene from the Ten Commandments. In fact, it's probably still the image you have in your mind when you reread the story in Exodus. It's become imprinted in our minds, and it certainly makes an impression, special effects notwithstanding. Cecil B. DeMille, Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner, these are images that stick in our heads and modify how we see these stories unfold. And that's not bad. We just need to remember that had we been there, we would have seen something probably very different. The special effects and the actors and the imagery are not the important parts. The how is not important. It's the that is important. That it happened is more important than the how it happened. Because that it happened forms the foundation of our faith in the faithfulness of God and the reliability of His saving grace. The faithfulness of God is what the crossing of the Red Sea story is all about. God promised and He delivered. And when the way seemed impossible, God made it happen. Remember the old song? God will make a way when there seems to be no way. Between the sea and the Egyptian chariots, the Israelites appeared to be trapped with no escape. And yet, God will make a way when there seems to be no way. The remembrance of this event was the bedrock of the Jewish understanding of who they are and who God is. Scripture conflates the whole Exodus story with the crossing of the Red Sea. Turn to Psalm 106, verses 7 through 12, and read, "Our ancestors, when they were in Egypt, did not consider your wonderful works. They did not remember the abundance of your steadfast love, but rebelled against the Most High at the Red Sea. Yet He saved them for His name's sake, so that He might make known His mighty power. He rebuked the Red Sea, and it became dry. He led them through the deep as through a desert. So He saved them from the hand of the foe and delivered them from the hand of the enemy. The waters covered their adversaries. Not one of them was left. Then they believed His words. They sang His praise." And then the story is turned into a refrain that reminds the people of God's faithfulness and power. Psalm 66, verse 6 says, "He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the river on foot. There we rejoiced in Him." And even in the New Testament, the Red Sea crossing provides powerful imagery for the people of God. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 29, it says, "By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land, but when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned." So let's look at this episode a little more closely. Notice that in the whole passage that was read a moment ago, there is no mention of the Red Sea. In all of chapter 14 of Exodus, it just says the sea, no reference at all to the Red Sea. And in only a couple of places before this point is the sea identified as the Red Sea, in chapter 10, verse 19, and chapter 13, verse 18. And then it isn't until chapter 15 that it is named again. Exodus 15, verse 4 says, "Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea. His picked officers were sunk in the Red Sea." Red Sea is the traditional rendering coming from the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. But the Hebrew can also be translated as Sea of Reeds or Reed Sea. That's why you might have noticed that variant translation in other places. Due to various translations, there's confusion about just which body of water the Israelites crossed while escaping from Egypt. But it really doesn't matter, as, again, the important thing is that God delivered them from the Egyptian army by allowing them to cross safely while the Egyptians were caught and drowned in the water. The what or where is neither here nor there. So, just to catch us up, Pharaoh finally let the Israelites go after the 10th plague, killing of the firstborn boys. But once again, he changed his mind and musters his army to chase after the Israelites. He catches up with them at the Red Sea, and the setting is set for one final demonstration of God's power at the expense of the Egyptians, one that will remain in the minds and hearts of the Israelites/Jews forever. This is the first of three great climaxes in Exodus: crossing the Red Sea in chapter 14, delivering the law in chapter 19 and following, and the glory of the Lord filling the tabernacle at the end of chapter 40. Moses knows that the people need to be reminded of the nature of God's power and that he keeps his promises. So even though Pharaoh's army is closing in on them from behind and the sea blocks their way in front, Moses tells them that this is a time not to panic and worry, but to stand firm. Earlier in chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, it says, "But Moses said to the people, 'Do not be afraid, stand firm, and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still.'" It's kind of an early version of the "don't worry, be happy" phrase. But really, it's "don't worry, stand firm in the Lord." And it's echoed in Paul's letter to the Galatians in chapter 5, verse 1, where he writes, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." Just when there seems to be no way out, God is able to display his power and mercy. And the memory of this mighty act of deliverance for God's people gives us hope for the future. Just as God delivered the people once, he can and will do so again. As we look at the road before us, the obstacles are great. Those who would try to keep us in Egypt will get desperate and will throw everything they can at us. Things may begin to look bleak, like there is no way out, just like for the people of Israel. But that is when we must stand firm and have faith. Every day we should look for the redemption of the Lord. Remember verse 13 of Exodus chapter 14. "But Moses said to the people, 'Do not be afraid, stand firm, and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today.' The chariots may try to run us down, but our God will lift us up. Our way may appear to be blocked, but God will make a way. Our situation may seem hopeless, but with God, all things are possible." Staying in Egypt may be easier, but at what cost? What do we have to give up to remain in Egypt? What compromises will be required of us in order to go along, to get along? These are questions whose answers are not only not palatable to Orthodox believers, but untenable for we who want to follow Jesus and the teachings of the Bible. Paul, again, echoes Moses in his letter to second letter to the Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 15. "So then, brothers and sisters, stand firm and hold fast to the traditions that you were taught by us, either by word of mouth or by our letter." It's not going to be easy, but following Jesus rarely is. Next week, we'll continue this series with part 7. I want you to look at Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 through 12, where God provides sustenance in the desert, and come prepared next week to hear what God may be speaking to our hearts. Now let us pause for a few moments to reflect prayerfully on what God is saying to us today.